The storm didn't roll in the way storms were supposed to. It charged low, furious, scraping the prairie raw. Wind tore across the open land, carrying needles of rain and dust that stung the skin and erased the horizon. The sky pressed down heavy and close, as if the frontier itself was trying to crush whatever still dared to stand beneath it. Elias Boone felt it before he saw it. His horse slowed, ears pinned, hooves uneasy on the churned earth. Elias leaned forward in the saddle, coat snapping hard against his frame, eyes cutting through the gray blur ahead. He'd lived long enough out here to know when something was wrong. Storms didn't scare him. People did. That's when he saw her. A shape near the trail. Too small to be debris. Too still to be safe. She was half curled in the mud, dress plastered to her legs, wrists raw and red as if rope had only just been torn away. Her dark hair whipped across her face, and when she lifted her head, her eyes burned with something sharper than fear. Elias dismounted without thinking. The wind swallowed the sound of his boots as he knelt beside her. She flinched hard, scrambling backward, hands shaking like they didn't belong to her anymore. "Don't," she rasped. Her voice was torn thin by the storm. "You don't want this." Elias held up one hand. Slow. Careful. He'd learned long ago that sudden kindness could scare worse than cruelty. "You're hurt," he said. She laughed, short, bitter, almost swallowed by the wind. "I'm worse than hurt." Thunder cracked close enough to rattle bone. She leaned toward him then, just enough that he caught her next words, whispered like a curse meant to save him. "You choose me," she said, eyes locked onto his. "You'll regret it. Men already died for less." Elias studied her face. The bruises. The resolve underneath the fear. He looked past her to the open land. Empty, unforgiving, crawling with the kind of men who hunted instead of helped. He could leave. Ride on. Let the storm finish what it started. Instead, he shrugged out of his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but I ain't much for running." Lightning split the sky as he lifted her onto his horse. The storm howled louder, as if angered by the choice. And just like that, on a trail nearly erased by rain and dust, two lives bent toward a future neither of them could outride. The cabin stood alone against the open land, its timbers darkened by years of wind and grit. It wasn't a place built for comfort. It was built to last. The rancher pushed the door open and ushered her inside. The fire already lit low, casting long, wavering shadows across the walls. Warmth met her skin for the first time in days, but it did nothing to loosen the tension in her shoulders. She stayed near the door, eyes tracking every corner. The rifle above the hearth. The narrow window half covered by a board. The heavy table scarred by knife marks. Safety, yes, but the kind that had been earned through violence. "Sit," the rancher said, not unkindly, setting a pot near the fire. He kept his distance, movements slow and deliberate, like he didn't want to startle something already cornered. She didn't sit. "I won't stay long," she said, her voice low, rough from cold and fear. "You shouldn't have brought me here." He glanced at her, measuring the weight behind the words. "Storm won't ask your permission," he replied. "Neither will night." Silence stretched between them. The fire cracked. Outside, wind scraped along the cabin walls like a warning trying to get in. She finally moved to the chair but stayed perched on the edge, ready to bolt. Her hands never stopped trembling. Not from cold alone but from expectation. Like she was waiting for the moment kindness turned sharp. "You got a name?" he asked. She hesitated. "Names get used against you." He nodded once. Didn't push. They ate in quiet, the space between them thick with questions neither dared ask. Where had she come from? Who was she running from? Why had she been so certain regret would follow him? When she stood to leave the table, he spoke again. "You can take the cot. Just for tonight." "And tomorrow?" she asked. He met her eyes then. Steady. Honest. "Tomorrow we'll see." She studied him, searching for the trick, the hook hidden in the offer. Finding none didn't ease her fear, it deepened it. She moved toward the cot but didn't remove her boots. The rancher took the chair by the wall, rifle across his knees. They shared the same roof that night but not trust. Not yet. Just an agreement carved thin as ice. She could stay a little while longer. Long enough for danger to remember where it was headed. Days stretched long on the ranch, measured not by clocks but by work. Fence posts needed setting. Water had to be hauled. Would split before nightfall. The rancher said little, but he never stopped moving. And the woman followed, wordless at first, learning the shape of the land and the rhythm of survival. Her hands blistered. She never complained. That told him more than questions ever could. In the evenings, they shared the table in silence broken only by the scrape of tin and the crackle of fire. Lantern light softened her face, revealing scars the daylight hid, faint bruises long healed, a cut along her brow that had never been properly mended. She watched the door even while eating. Watched the windows. A woman trained by danger never fully sits with her back unguarded. It was during one of those long evenings, when the wind pressed low against the cabin walls, that her story began to slip out. Not as a confession. As fragments. Names she didn't linger on. A town that turned its face when accusation became easier than truth. A night when survival demanded a choice that branded her forever. I did what I had to, she said once, voice flat. They called it a crime. I called it breathing. The rancher didn't interrupt. He understood that kind of arithmetic. Out here, morality was often decided by who lived long enough to tell it. He'd worn the weight of other men's judgments for years now, like a coat he couldn't take off. His story came out differently. Not in words but in habits. The way his eyes went distant when children's laughter carried on the wind from somewhere far away. The way he never spoke of the second bed in the loft. Or how his hand lingered on a rusted locket before he tucked it back beneath his shirt. Loss had carved him hollow. And once hollowed, he'd stopped choosing anyone at all. One night she finally asked, "Why you live alone?" He stared into the fire for a long time. "Because choosing costs," he said. "And I was tired of paying." She nodded, understanding too well. That was when she told him the rest. Not all at once, but enough. She wasn't just running from men with guns. She carried something they wanted buried. Words spoken in the wrong place. Knowledge that could ruin a powerful man who'd built his rule on fear and silence. "If they find me," she said quietly, "they'll finish what they started." The rancher looked at her then, not as a burden, not as trouble, but as someone marked by the same truth he was. That the frontier didn't forgive those who survived the wrong way. She'd been afraid to be chosen because choice drew fire. And he realized he'd stopped choosing because fear had won. Outside, the wind shifted. Somewhere beyond the hills, the past began to stir. The warning didn't arrive loud. It arrived polite. Dust rose on the far ridge just after noon, thin as a scar across the land. The rancher saw it from the porch and knew better than to ignore it. Riders moved slow, measured, the kind that didn't fear being seen. When they stopped at the fence, their horses didn't fidget. Neither did they. "Afternoon," the lead rider called, voice easy. "Fine stretch of land you've got." The woman stiffened behind the door. She'd felt this moment coming the way some folks feel weather in their bones. Her eyes went distant, counting exits, measuring time. "That's them," she whispered. "I told you." The rider smiled, eyes cold. "We're looking for someone," he said, like it was a neighborly favor. "Trouble follows her. Always has. We'd hate to see it follow you." The rancher didn't move. "Ain't seen anyone," he said. The smile thinned. "Choices have consequences out here. You've lived long enough to know that." He glanced at the cabin, just a flicker. "Best kind of regret is the kind you avoid." They rode off without another word. Dust settled. Silence came back wrong. Inside, the woman's resolve cracked. "You need to send me away," she said. "Now. Before they come back with more men. I don't belong here. I never do." The rancher watched her, really watched her. Fear braided with resolve, the kind born from surviving too much. "You think running fixes it?" "It fixes you," she shot back. "You didn't choose this." He stepped closer. "I did." She shook her head. "You'll lose everything." He looked past her, out at the land, then back. "Already lost most of it once. Won't lose myself again." He opened the door, walked onto the porch, and spoke to the empty road like the riders could still hear him. "She stays," he said. "If you want her, you come through me." That was the moment the line was drawn. Not in the dirt but in the choice. "So tell me, when the warning comes soft and smiling, what would you have done?" The land changed the moment the decision was made. The rancher moved with purpose now, no wasted steps, no hesitation. He laid his rifles across the table, breaking them down piece by piece, metal whispering against metal. Each weapon was checked, cleaned, loaded again. Ammunition was counted twice. Then once more. Outside he walked the perimeter, boots crunching gravel as his eyes traced every rise, every dip, every place a man might hide or die. The land had always been his ally. Tonight it would have to become his shield. The woman watched at first silent. The storm clouds were gathering low on the horizon, thick and bruised, the wind carrying the promise of violence. When he started boarding the windows, she stepped forward, took the hammer from his hand without asking. "I won't hide," she said. He studied her for a long beat. The fear was still there, but it no longer owned her. She moved with careful certainty, noticing angles, shadows, blind spots. She remembered things, where sound traveled, how footsteps lied, how men telegraphed intent before they ever drew a gun. Survival had taught her well. They worked side by side. He showed her how to load, how to wait, how not to flinch when the noise came. She listened, learned fast. When he handed her a revolver, the weight of it changed the room. Not a threat, a trust. "Only if you must," he said. She met his eyes. "I will." No speeches followed. None were needed. Trust didn't grow from words out here. It grew from shared danger. From hands bleeding together on rough wood. From silence heavy with things unspoken but understood. As night fell, the storm crept closer. Thunder rolled low, distant but deliberate, like something large making up its mind. Wind rattled the boards they just nailed in place. Lantern light flickered, casting their shadows tall and joined against the wall. The rancher marked positions in the dirt with the toe of his boot. She corrected one. He nodded once. That cabin was no longer a refuge. It was a stand. Outside, the first drops of rain struck the dust, darkening the earth and scattered wounds. Inside, two people who had once stood alone finished preparing, not as rescuer and regret, not as burden and shield, but as partners. Because on the frontier, standing wasn't an instinct. It was a decision. They came just before dawn, when the world was still holding its breath. The rancher felt it before he heard it. The way the land went quiet, the way even the wind seemed to draw back. Then the sound reached him. Hoofbeats. Not hurried, not careless, measured, confident. The kind of riding done by men who believed the ending was already written. He stepped out onto the porch as the first light bled into the sky. Figures emerged from the gray six, then more, spreading wide, cutting off the road, the ravine, the open ground. Rifles rested easy across saddles. Faces hard. Familiar in the way nightmares are familiar. Inside the cabin, the woman stiffened. She had known this moment would come. She had tasted it in every mile she'd run. Every night she'd slept with one eye open. She moved to the window just enough to see them. "I told you," she said quietly. "They don't stop." The rancher didn't look back. "Neither do I." The first shot cracked the morning open. Wood splintered near the door. Smoke followed. The rancher dragged the table over, flipped it on its side. He fired once through the narrow slit he'd cut days before. A man screamed. A horse went down. Then the air filled with noise. Gunfire echoing off the hills, shouts cutting through the smoke, the sharp metallic smell of powder burning the back of the throat. Between volleys, there were moments of awful stillness. Silence so complete it rang. In those gaps, fear tried to crawl in. "They'll burn us out," the woman said, reloading with steady hands that surprised even her. "Let 'em try." They did. Flames licked up the side of the cabin, orange and hungry. Heat pressed close. Smoke curled along the ceiling. The rancher kicked open the back shutter and fired again, forcing the attackers to scatter. One of them shouted her name, then spat it like a curse. That was when she knew running was done. She rose into view, heart hammering, voice cutting clean through the chaos. "You want me?" she yelled. "Then listen." The rancher turned, eyes wide, but she was already speaking, words she'd carried like a brand. Names. Deals. The truth of what she'd been blamed for and who had truly profited. Her voice shook, but it didn't break. Gunfire answered her confession. A bullet tore through the wall inches from her head. She flinched, then stood firmer. Fear had ruled her too long. If this was the end, it would not be on her knees. The rancher moved then, fast, decisive. He burst from the side door, using smoke and surprise, dropping one man then another. The fight spilled into the open, dirt kicking up, echoes rolling across the land. It was close now. Brutal. No room for doubt. The leader charged, rage burning bright. You should have let her go. The rancher met him head-on. I did, he said. She chose to stay. The shot rang out. The man fell. What remained scattered, retreating into the thinning smoke, leaving the ranch scarred but standing. As the sun finally broke free of the horizon, light washed over the ground, over blood, over ash, over two figures still standing. The woman let out a breath she'd been holding for years. Regret hadn't followed them into the daylight. Only quiet. The gunfire faded the way storms do on the plains. Sudden silence, ringing ears, the land holding its breath. Smoke drifted low across the yard, curling around trampled grass and splintered posts. The antagonist was gone now, carried off wounded pride and broken men, leaving nothing behind but blood in the dirt and fear that would not return soon. The ranch still stood, scarred, but standing. Rain came then, soft at first, like the land testing whether it was allowed to heal. Drops hissed against hot barrels and darkened the dust where violence had taken root. The woman stepped out onto the porch, letting the rain touch her face. No flinch, no whispered warning, just a long breath she'd been holding for years. For the first time, regret wasn't the loudest thing in her chest. The rancher watched her from the doorway. He felt the weight of the night settle. Not heavy anymore, but real. He had chosen once more. Chosen to stand. Chosen to protect. And though the cost had been high, the emptiness he'd lived with for so long was gone, replaced by something quieter, steadier. They worked together as dawn crept in. Boards replaced. Windows mended. Blood washed away by rain and honest labor. The ranch looked different in the early light. Less like a fortress, more like a home that had survived its trial. The storm clouds broke apart, leaving clean sky in their wake. She met his eyes as the sun rose. No warning this time. Just certainty. What began as a risk, one choice made in bad weather, had become a future neither of them planned, but both were willing to claim. On the frontier, that was the only kind that lasted. Out here on the frontier, regret never came from choosing someone. It came from the moments when fear spoke louder than the heart. When a man turned away because the cost looked too high. The land remembered those choices. So did the silence that followed them. She had warned him, told him he would regret choosing her. And maybe he did regret something, just not what she meant. He regretted every year he spent alone. Every night he let the storm howl past his door without answering it. Because courage, the kind that lasts, isn't found in pulling a trigger. It's found in standing still when the world tells you to run. So let me ask you, friend, as the fire burns low, what would have guided you? When fear promised safety and courage promised consequence, which voice would you have followed? Would you have chosen comfort? Or chosen someone? If this tale struck a chord in you, leave your thoughts here in the dust. Tell us what choice you would have made when the price became clear. And if you wish to keep riding these long frontier roads with us, where stories are carved from grit, mercy, and hard-earned hope, then subscribe and stay close. The storm has passed now. Firelight holds steady. And where one man once stood alone, two lives face the dawn together.